I've used my voice shouting about the Gaza-Palestine conflict. But I want to talk about, and I want us all to think about the principle of just war and justice in war, given what's happening in Israel. Because the Christian worldview is not frameless and not deficient in allowing us to think about this idea and about thinking about what a just war and how to conduct ourselves justly in war looks like. It has been written about by many church fathers, and it was adopted by the church as a meditation upon war. And how do we think about war? So I want us to think through the Israeli-Palestine conflict using this Christian framework to educate ourselves in a deeper way about our faith. We know that Christ wasn't a pacifist. Christ created a weapon. Christ used a weapon. Christ is the same God of the Old Testament, and the Old Testament says that Yahweh is a God of war. One of the titles of Yahweh is Yahweh of armies, Lord of armies. Christ said that he had 12 legions of angels in heaven. And we pray as Christians, thy will be done, thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So if Christ can have legions of angels in heaven, why can he not have legions of followers on earth? So if Christians can have armies, how should Christians conduct themselves? Thank you so much, brother. How should Christians conduct themselves in war? The first principle of the just war is that wars have to be fought by a legitimate authority. This criterion is aimed to limit conflict. This is why, as a Christian, I don't support vigilantism. And you should never hear anything I say as trying to justify vigilantism. Because for me, a violent act has to be organized by a legitimate authority. Can't be just a gang that appoint themselves the arbiter of justice. And so captains, priestlings, governments, and in societies where government has broken down, bishops can organize Christians to the effect of conducting a war. That is the idea of a legitimate authority. It has to come from governments or other legitimate authorities, and where governments don't exist, the only other form of government that we accept is the government of the church, the government of the bishops. The next principle of a just war is the idea that the cause itself must be just. The war must be fought in order to resist aggression. And that's why Israel right now has a just cause to fight against Hamas. It must be fought to protect the innocent, which is why armies can be mobilized to defend non-combatants. It must be organized to support the rights of the oppressed. And that's why Christian governments can form holy leagues or establish Christian foreign legions to support the persecuted church around the world. There must be significant reasons which are weighty enough to overthrow the primacy of the value of peace. In other words, this is the equation we should do. Is the cost of peace too high versus the cost of war? That means, brothers and sisters, that if we are dealing with Israel's discriminatory practices against Christians, well, this can be tackled in other ways. The cost of war is greater than non-violent means of tackling those injustices. But Christian cities, Christian governments can and did have the right to organize to destroy ISIS when ISIS was dedicated to destroying Christianity in the Middle East, because the price of non-action was greater than the price of peace. And then we'll go on to justice in war secondly. Thirdly, the war itself must be fought with the right intentions. The doctrine of total war that we saw emerge in World War I and had the antecedents in the Crimean War are anti-ethical to the Christian faith. World War I and particularly World War II were fought on the doctrine of total war. Total war is an Enlightenment, not a Christian doctrine of war. Christians should condemn total war. Wars have to be fought for the right intentions, and the right intentions is not to destroy your enemies completely. It must advance the good and avoid evil. It must have clear aims, be open to negotiation. It must not be for the act of revenge, where the total war doctrine allows for the act of revenge. It must not be for just the sake of killing, and we shouldn't fool ourselves into acting out of other motives while tricking ourselves into thinking we're fighting in a just war. The cause of war must always be about securing peace in the best possible terms, righting wrong, resisting enemies that cannot be negotiated with. And where you do have an enemy that cannot be negotiated with, like ISIS, like Hamas, then of course the war has to be prosecuted until the enemy is destroyed. Like the Amalekites in the Old Testament, they could not be negotiated with, they had to be destroyed. Finally, war should always be a last resort. We shouldn't be hasty to run to the gun, because Christ said that those who live by the sword die by the sword. But, ladies and gentlemen, the Bible also says that there is a time for peace and a time for war. And so, when you are dealing with intransigent, hate-filled enemies like Hamas and ISIS, you have to reach for the sword, because there is no peaceful option. There is no negotiation with an irrational enemy that makes no rational terms that can be negotiated with. Hamas, in its charter, is committed to the death of Jews around the world, ladies and gentlemen. These are not rational enemies like the IRA. They don't have political points that we can negotiate. They are religiously driven fanatics that must be destroyed by a commitment to justice, because their understanding of peace will result in the persecution of Jews and Christians around the world.
Correcto.
Finally,
Yeah.
finally,
Alright.
you can only fight a war if you have a reasonable chance of winning. In other words, ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
Israel,
Yeah.
there is a question about whether Israel has a just cause.
Right.
Because there is a question as to whether Israel can destroy Hamas, or whether Hamas will be just replaced by another Islamist organization.
Easily happen.
However, ladies and gentlemen,
Tell us.
however, ladies and gentlemen,
Tell us.
the international community
Yeah.
could decide by international mandate to occupy Gaza and to destroy the Islamist networks.
Arrivederci.
And I believe
Yeah.
that if the international community decided to bring peace to this conflict, it would have more success than Israel. Are there any questions before I move on to my next section?
No more questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to the lies of the Dawagandists
Yeah.
who come and distract you from the talk to tell you that everything I'm saying is a lie.
Of the liar.
Don't believe the lies of the Dawagandists who prey on your ignorance and try to distract you from any voice that doesn't agree with them.
Correct.
Ladies and gentlemen,
That's right. We'll see.
any questions or points before I go on to my next part of the presentation?
Any questions on
Don't believe their lies, ladies and gentlemen.
What's the question?
I guarantee he's telling you a load of lies right now.
Who's that?
So, ladies and gentlemen, the next point, go on, sister.
What happened if Israel do a peace treaty?
So, ladies and gentlemen,
What's the question?
we have to recognize that Israel can only prosecute this war as far as America and its allies in the West allow them.
Alright.
Given the atrocities that Israel has suffered, it is fair that Israel be allowed to prosecute its war to Hamas insofar as it can. But the international community should uphold the rules of law. It should allow for civilians and non-combatants to get out of the way. It should allow medicine, electricity, and food and water to get through. Why?
Why?
Will Hamas take advantage of that? Absolutely it will. But Israel has to be better than Hamas. Why?
Why?
Because this battle, sadly, is for the hearts and minds of the world. And Israel can't win that battle if it allows Hamas to drag it into the gutter and the mud.
Right, that's it.
I understand, because I deal with Islamists here in the park all the time, that their poison can get inside of you, that their hatred can get inside of you. And that is why you have to cleanse yourself of that poison and that hatred.
Bob, who do you support, Bob?
The brother asks, who do I support?
Who do you support?
I support the Christians in Palestine and the Christians in Israel.
Thank you, Bob.
Any other questions before I move on to my next point in the talk?
What's happening? But I don't tell me. I don't like to.
Sorry?
Would you like to compare between what's happening between the conflict between Palestinian and Israeli and what's happening in Russia and Ukraine or no?
So,
What's the question?
ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
I've already done a comparison of the hypocrisies of the West, who were silent about the ethnic cleansing of 120,000 Armenian Christians in Azerbaijan, or silent in their condemnation of Turkey's continued occupation of northern Cyprus. Ladies and gentlemen, the West, ladies and gentlemen, have allowed Turkey to support Islamists, ISIS, and Islamists in Azerbaijan. Turkey should be kicked out of NATO.
Yes.
I'm already on record of condemning Putin's invasion of Russia. That also is wrong. However, ladies and gentlemen, I want to continue with one more point about the presentation that I'm making before I take other questions and points from yourself. So, ladies and gentlemen,
What is the answer?
Christians in their meditations upon war are committed to the idea of justice in war. That means, therefore, there must be discrimination between combatants and non-combatants in war. When Christians were dealing with the collapse of the French kingdom in the 11th century, when brigands, Christian brigands, were raping and attacking Christian villagers indiscriminately, the church mobilized the full weight of its moral authority to argue for the peace of God. They gathered the knights of the medieval world together before the bones of the saints, and they said to these knights that if you continue to rape and pillage and rob against civilians, the saints themselves will pray your souls into hell. And this created the code of chivalry that is a Christian martial code that every Christian warrior is committed to. And that Christian martial code means that in the conduct of war, you don't rape women, you don't shoot unharmed combatants, you don't take civilians as captives. That when your enemy is defeated, that you treat him with humanity. That means that you do give those people medical care. This is the Christian understanding of the point and the conduct of the Christian warrior in war. And that is why Christian men should be taught the code of chivalry, that their duty is always to protect the weak, and if necessary, that means using the full power of their strength to do so. And that means that the international community should put pressure on the IDF to do all that it can to defend non-combatants, especially Christians who are not in bed with Hamas. Any other questions or comments on this part of my presentation before I move on to my next point? The next point of the just in bellum code of war that Christians have developed and that Christians believe in is the idea that there must be proportion. That is, there must be a balance between the good achieved versus the harm done. This condition takes into account the effects on all the human beings involved, not just those on your own side. And it affects on humans rather than physical damage to property, which is the priority. This means, ladies and gentlemen, that before Israel launches its legitimate ground offensive into Gaza, it should negotiate with and provide for, with Egypt or the West Bank, the retreat and evacuation of women and children, of Christians, and of those that don't wish to fight. Once that evacuation has been achieved, and the only ones remaining are the ones who choose to stay there, then Israel has the right to prosecute its war against Hamas. A just war, then, is not just war in which both sides act justly. It is the idea that any just army cannot escape from the principles of just war, even if its enemies do not. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, the world needs Christianity, because the world has been poisoned by a doctrine of total war. A doctrine that everyone has adopted without understanding that there is a better Christian alternative. And finally, I encourage every Christian fellowship to use the code of chivalry to disciple men to be men. Any questions or comments, ladies and gentlemen? Any questions or comments from someone that's not a childish heckler? Go on, Ro. No, on the topic. Okay. If there are no questions on the topic, then I'll take any questions about any aspect of the Christian faith. What we believe, what our values are, what our history is, what our traditions are, what our customs are. So this brother got in first. I'll take his question, then yours. If it's a Bible verse, get the Bible verse first.
Yeah, sure. So, but it's a compound question. So, would you? So it's just two yes or no's. Then it's a main one which I want you to expand. So, do you believe Jesus is the Word?
Yes.
Do you believe Jesus is the angel of the Lord?
Right. So the question is, do I believe that Jesus is the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament, who is described in the Johanic text as the word of the Lord? The answer to both of these questions is yes. Over to you, sir. What's your question?
My question is, has your Christian specific approach?
I can't hear you, sir. Sorry.
But your Christian approach is very special. What do you think about the persecution of the Zionist country called Israel from 75 years of occupation, colonization and spoliation of Palestine, land of Christianity, and all Christians there are persecuted from 75 years until now.
Okay, let me answer that question, sir.
So what do you think?
I'm just about to answer that question,
without
sir.
Talking about Muslims.
Sorry. Right. Firstly, no Muslim gets to tell me what to do in the park. And because he tried to tell me what to do, I'm going to start by talking about Christian Muslims. Hamas persecutes Palestinian Christians. Hamas is an Islamist organization committed to Sharia law. And in Sharia law, Christians are considered dhimmis. Dhimmis are second-class Christians in the Islamic world, and Christians in Palestine are persecuted by Hamas. Christians do not have the right to practice their faith fully and completely under the laws of Hamas. Conversion to Christianity is illegal in Hamas. All of you should never allow this debate to be hijacked by those who are apologists for terrorist outfits, who try to present this argument as supporting Palestinians or supporting Israel. Right now, the choice is supporting peace-loving Palestinians who are the Christians and those who agree with the Christians, and Islamist sympathizers of Hamas. Now, to come to the main point of the question, and notice how they're triggered. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, how they don't condemn the discrimination and the persecution of Christians. Don't believe the lies. If you don't believe me, go and speak to the Christians of the Muslim world and ask them what it meant to be treated like a dhimmi. Don't ask the Muslim apologist. They're just going to lie to you. Go and speak to the Middle Eastern Christians and ask them for yourselves. And they will tell you who is lying, and they will tell you that I am speaking the truth. Now, ladies and gentlemen, to answer the question directly that he asked, as I've already said multiple times, the persecution that is being carried out by the settler movement needs to be tackled by the international community. Injustices by the state of Israel should be called out. But let's recognize that Israel can be spoken to. Israel can be educated. Israel can be reasoned with. Hamas cannot.
Unchristian, divisive teaching. May your God come to you and reveal to you this division is wrong.
Jesus Christ said, I have not come to bring peace, but the sword, to turn daughter against mother, son against father, brother against brother. For he who is not worthy, he who chooses mother, father, brothers and sisters over me are not worthy of me.